everyone, and welcome to our session on Excel tips and tricks. I'm Stacy Dreher, Marketing Director for James Moore & Company, and I'll be your host. Our session today is packed full of great information, so I'd like to welcome back our dynamic duo, Brendan McKitrick and Dakota Spencer, who will be presenting today's session, which I'm sure will be chock full of bad dad jokes and some great Excel tips and tricks. So in addition to their credentials listed below, both Brendan and Dakota are members of the North Central chapter of the FGFOA, the AICPA Government Audit Quality Center, and the FICPA State and Local Government section. So guys, what tricks do you have up your sleeves today?
Thanks, Stacy. We're excited to be here, and as Stacy mentioned, we were able to present on internal controls on a remote environment a few weeks back. I do have a few bad Excel jokes along the way, so hopefully you all can appreciate that. I know Dakota and Stacy will, so just kind of assume everyone's laughing when I tell those. Before we kind of dive into the agenda, I do want to make sure everyone's downloaded the material. There is a workbook and also what we're calling a cheat sheet, which is a 2-page PDF. If you haven't done that, it's actually in the GoToMeeting taskbar. You can download that now, so please download that. Kind of the intention of this is a very much a working kind of session. So if you've got the ability to, watching the presentation on one screen and then also working through the workbook, or if your screen's large enough, being able to split that. And then also having the cheat sheets for reference. You don't have to have that in front of you, but we will kind of refer back to that from time to time. Just a couple things before we get into it. The agenda does, it's a brief introduction, which we're going through now. Then we're going to dive into the spreadsheets, and then if we have time, we'll go through the Q&A. But kind of some things to talk about before going into the spreadsheet is just some general tips that we work through. If there's anything while you're working through Excel that you have questions on, obviously webinars like this are helpful, but a big reference for us is Google and YouTube. You can find a lot of resources there. I know for Dakota and I, we've kind of learned along the way. So, there's other people we've pulled this, information and skills from as well. We'll be the first to admit we don't know everything in Excel, and I'm sure there are probably people on this webinar that know functions that we've never even heard of, just because there's so many, and it's such a powerful tool. It is something we use every day, especially as auditors. Some people that we work with probably use it more than us, even on a personal level. From budgeting personally to kind of tracking all sorts of things. Kind of the goal today is to cover some basic concepts to maybe some more intermediate concepts, and there'll be some functions that you may think are pretty elementary, but within those functions, we're going to show you some tips. So you may see us go through like a count function and say, oh, that's really basic. However, there's some tips that we go along. So try and follow along, because my thought is if you can at least pull one thing away from this presentation, then that'll just help you become more efficient.
Yeah, and just to kind of echo what Brendan touched on there, the whole point of this is to try to build some basic efficiencies in Excel. And while a lot of this stuff you may have seen before, some of you may not have seen at all, but we don't want to overload anyone. So if you can take one or two things away from today, and then the next day you get one or two things in addition, and you keep adding on like that, you'll see in a matter of a month, you'll be moving through Excel a lot faster than you thought possible earlier in the week. Not saying that we can give you all those skills, but hopefully we can help you get there with a couple of things. And then just a couple of quick things I always reference when I'm using Excel. One good tip, always make sure you're keeping a notes tab. Especially if you're working in a bigger spreadsheet, you can have a notes tab for kind of how you navigate through what you're doing, if you need to extract certain data at certain times, why, and then that will actually help someone who's coming behind you or possibly your staff next year as you're trying to push the work to someone else. They can identify what you performed, and it can kind of jog your memory as you're trying to help them with that. And then also, before you're going to manipulate your data, make sure you keep an extra copy of it. So just even copying it in the same instance of Excel but into a separate tab means you always have that original file with you. So if you are manipulating something and you accidentally delete one number and your totals go off, you can always have that check back to the original to know that you may be missing something. So we kind of think of it as Excel just like and auditing, kind of the same thing as math class from high school, right? Your teacher always said, show your work, because if you don't show your work, you didn't do it. It's the same thing within a big auditing concept for ours. If we don't have anything documented, we don't get to take credit for anything. So definitely help with that notes page, and that extra edit tab will help you guys as we navigate through. But I think first we have our polling question.
Sure. Okay, in just a minute, you'll see our first polling question. Have you downloaded the materials for the training? Hopefully all of you say yes. We do have a few of you who have said no. You better do it now. All right, we're going to give people a few more seconds to answer this.
One other thing too, Stacy, that I forgot to point out, this will be on YouTube later. So even if you're not able to work through it, or you miss something, or we go through it too quickly, you can refer back to it. And obviously we're available for Q&A as well.
Great activity to do on the weekends.
All right, I'm going to close the poll and let's see the results. 85% of you have downloaded the materials, 10% haven't, and 4% what materials?
Those 4% are my kind of people.
All right, thanks, Stacy. So right now what I'm going to do is actually exit out of the PowerPoint presentation. I do want to show real quick the cheat sheet that we're referring to, and then I'm going to close this down. If you can have it available, it's great, but we'll talk through a lot of this already. The first page really is to kind of highlight some formulas. Again, Excel has a ton of formulas to utilize, but these are some that we use kind of day to day. We're not really going to go through that in detail. We'll talk about these later. And then on the second page, we've got the cheat sheet of hotkeys and some other things that we want to run through. Again, I'm not going to go through all of these. However, it is kind of a good guide if you want to refer back to it. So I'm actually going to close this down now and jump into the spreadsheet. So again, I just want to go through a couple that I think are kind of handy to work through. We're not going to go through each one of these. The first one being Control A seems pretty straightforward, and it's a select all function. However, one of the benefits in here, if you're in a data set or table, if you hit Control A, you quickly pick that table up. So again, rather than doing, and to back up a little bit, what we're trying to do is be able to cut some time down for you. So rather than clicking and dragging all the way down, which may take a few seconds, I essentially hit 2 keys and I've selected the entire data. The one thing to point out here, it kind of goes from all the data that's connected. So you can see it's going from check all the way down to the bottom. However, I just went to the second tab. If I do Control A, you can see it's actually picking up bank code. The important thing to know here is we're going to talk about filters in a minute. If you do a Control A and then a filter, it's going to pick up the line above what I want to pick up, so the check, vendor, and name. So again, just be aware of that. The other thing too is if you happen to have a space in the data, it won't pick up everything. So I'm going to very quickly insert a row, Control A, and you can see that it's cut off there. So a lot of the tips we're going to be kind of teaching throughout today is you've got to understand the functionality, because if you don't fully understand the functionality, you may be picking up erroneous data, or you may not be picking up all the data you want. So again, Control A is to pick that up. If I hit Control A again, it picks up the entire worksheet. Control C is another function within Excel that we use pretty often. With any of these functions, there's always multiple ways to do this. So if I right-click on the cell, you've got the copy function here. You also have the function on the top left of copy, and when you hover over that, it shows you the shortcut. So again, for me, it's quicker to hit Control C than to move it back and forth. So when you hit Control C, it's copied that cell. You can see that cell for C&E is now kind of a different look to it. Then you have the ability to paste that, which is Control V, which is a little further down. Again, you've got multiple ways to do that. You can click the icon in the top left, or you can just hit Control V. One of the nice things with copy is there's multiple ways to paste. So if I were to hit Enter, I'm able to paste it, and that information is no longer copied. So again, there's different flavors in copy and paste, but there are ways to do that and kind of quicker ways to get through that. Control F is a really powerful tool in here. It's find. Before I select Control F, you also have the ability to do, again, click on find select, and then you've got the find capability. I'm going to use Control F here. So kind of on a basic level, it's kind of what you think. So what are you looking for? So if I were to search for BIF and then find next, it looks for kind of the first item of BIF that it can find. Now, the piece that's nice in here is you've got options as well as a find all capability. So if I do find all, it gives me all the different references to BIF within this tab. Now, why I say this tab, because within the options button here, you can actually have it search within the workbook. So again, currently it's defaulted at sheet, which is the tab, but if for whatever reason I wanted to look in the entire workbook, I can change that, find all, and now I have every reference of BIF within this worksheet for all the tables or the tabs, and you can see where those are. And what's nice about the find all is it's hyperlinked, so I can very quickly just select that and go directly there. Kind of an kind of another layer to this on the find. So again, I'm going to hit find. You've got the, as I mentioned, the workbook versus sheet, but you also have look in. So what's nice about this is you've got formulas and values. So when you're looking for, and I'll give you an example, you can see this data set right here, or this data is actually a formula. So if I were to look for CAE, you would say, okay, why is that not picking it up? Well, right now it's looking for the formula, not the output. So if I quickly change that to values, you've got CAE. So it's, again, it's something where as long as you know how that function works, you're able to kind of navigate it, because you can clearly see it's CAE's there, however, it's not picking it up. Why? Replace is the next function that I think is really important, which is Control H. I never remember Control H, I just remember Control F because it's in the same kind of text box right here. So with Control H or Control F and then switching to replace, it's basically what it's saying it is. So if I wanted to change 2016 to 2017, it's going to look for the next cell and then replace. Oh, actually, sorry. It's going to replace the highlighted cell, and it's only going to do it once. Now, if I wanted to do everything within the worksheet, you can hit replace all, and it's going to replace it. Again, pretty basic, but you've got to remember you've got the ability to change that. Now, what we use it for a lot of what we do as auditors is we can actually do a focused replace. So everything that you select, if I want to change this to 2018, it'll replace just the selection. Again, we use this quite a bit. We have a lot of formulas and functions where we have to replace certain data sets or data or numbers or whatever it may be. So it's kind of a hyper-focused replace. So rather than manually going in and changing a formula for each one, you can do a replace all. Kind of a working along down the cheat sheet, Control S, save. We live by this. We save all the time, especially with Excel crashing. Control Z is another one, undo, as you kind of make errors. Again, you've got other ability, you have another way to do that with the button at the top left. However, if you were to delete some data, you want to undo that very quickly, Control Z. And then on the right side of that page, real quickly, the control arrow, and we'll look at this kind of in more detail as we go along, it very quickly jumps you down to the end of a data set. So again, if I'm at the top and I want to scroll down, it's going to take me some time. However, if I hold Control and then an arrow, it'll take me to the bottom of that connected data. Additionally, the shift function with the arrow will pick up, again, I'm holding shift and an arrow, and it's selecting that data individually. Now the power of Excel, if you hold Control and Shift, it'll select everything in that column, because I did Control Shift down. Now if I do Control Shift right, I've now selected the entire data. Again, there's multiple ways to do that. I mentioned Control A can do the same thing. However, depending on what you're trying to get to, you may want to do a Control Shift.
And if there are some blank spaces in there too, the Control Shift down will stop at that as well. So the same thing we showed with the row earlier.
Yeah. So again, this cheat sheet is more for reference. I'm not going to go through every one of these. And again, we'll refer back to some of these later, but it is kind of a nice reference. And I kind of tried to highlight the ones we probably use more so than others. So now I want to go into the formulas. But before I do that, I've got a joke for Dakota.
Oh.
Dakota, what does a baby Excel sheet drink?
You know this.
Formula. Oh.
You're welcome. And I've got a couple more, so don't worry. So
Did you make that up, Brendan?
No.
Oh, okay.
I'm not that creative. So since he mentioned formula, we are going to look at some formulas in here. The first one being count, it is a pretty simple one, but before we do count, there, just like anything else, there's multiple ways to get to formulas. So you can, if you know the formula, you can type out the formula and you'll actually see that it starts to create it. If you're not as familiar, you can actually do the formula button up here and it'll create kind of a search function. Part of the bad thing about the search function, if you don't type the complete word, it's not going to really know what you're looking for. So you've got to kind of have an idea as to which direction you're going. If you type the word, go into the formula, then you've got some options. It gives you a description of what that formula is and also kind of tells you, hey, what do you need to include in here? So value 1, it says, hey, go ahead and make sure you're including the data. Specifically for this one, it's the numbers, and it even gives you kind of an example output. So we have a 1 here. There's also, if you don't like either of those options, you've got another option going to the formulas tab, and then if you know what type of formula it is, you can go in here as well. Again, there's just a variety of ways to do that. But going back to the count function, one of the nice things in Excel is if you don't maybe want like an output that stays in the worksheet, but you just want to quickly see a summary of maybe some financial for some numbers. If you do, again, I'm going to refer back to Control Shift down. You can see in the bottom of your worksheet right here, you've got a couple numbers in here, including average, count, and sum. So very quickly, I can say, okay, look, I've got a count of 134. Again, in Excel, you can create a formula. So I'm going to go ahead and do a count. And then I'm going to select that information, but just so it's easier, you can follow the values. I want to select this column. So again, I'm going to select the first one, Control Shift down. You can see I have an output of 134. The drawback, and one of the reasons Dakota hates this, is it's only good for numerical values. It's not good for text. So if I were to change this, you have an output of 0.
Which is a lie.
So just like with anything else, you'd ask, okay, is there a formula to pick that up? Of course there is. So again, I'm going to go back, and there's this one called Count A, which I believe Dakota would say, just go ahead and use that no matter what. And that one will go ahead and count any information. So essentially any non-blanks. That's how they're doing that. So again, it's just kind of an alternative way to do that. With count, the other thing I kind of wanted to show was kind of some error resolution. So the first column, column A, you can see it looks like numbers. Kind of one of the keys here, though, if you worked in Excel enough, you can tell it's hard to see on my screen, but there's a little green kind of nodular in the top left, and there's an error button that pops up. So if I were to actually try and do a count here, you're gonna see that it says 0, and you're like, well, what the heck? Well, what's happening here is Excel has converted this to a text versus a number. There's a couple ways to remediate this. You can do, basically, you can create a formula which would convert it, which is the value formula. So if I were to do value, it essentially just changes it, to a number. For whatever reason, if you wanted to keep both the text and the number, you can do that. You can also select that information, change it to number, and then select this. Again, this is one where we get quite a bit. and you can see very quickly my formula's updated. There's also a text to columns function you can use. I won't go into detail there, but it'll convert it as well. But there's a variety of ways. The only reason I mention that is because there's a lot of times when you're looking at something and you're like absolutely sure the formula should work and it doesn't, and it's trying to like figure out what's going on. Excel tries to explain what the issues are, but it's not always straightforward. So you've got to kind of play around with it a little bit. And I'll kind of go back to what I said before. Google and YouTube are your friends. So if you can't kind of figure it out, I try and do some sort of search to figure that out. So kind of along those same lines, I'm actually going to go over to mailing list. I mentioned Count A. Count A is, again, powerful if you want to, if you've got some data that you want to look through and you have blanks and non-blanks, so you can very quickly see that. Count if is another good one. So again, these are basic functions, but the reason why I want to show these is within the function, you've got a variety of ways you can select that data. So again, if I do a count if, select this data, which it's asking for the range, so where do you want to look? I want to look in this column, and then what do you want to look for? What's the criteria? I want to look for Y. Well, in Excel, it'd be great if you could just hit the Y. However, it doesn't work that way. So you can see when I hit Y, it's getting an output of 0. What's happening is for text, it actually wants you to put the parentheses, or the quotes. So again, you can see now my output's 11. So great, it works. I'm not going to go into the detail in Excel, but there's referencing in Excel. So one of the benefits I mentioned copy and paste, you can actually do a drag. So if you were to select on the bottom corner, you can drag this formula down. And you would say, well, why is it decreasing? Well, the referencing. So you can see as I move down, the table's referencing. There's a couple ways to clean that up. One way, which is a way I did for a long time, is you essentially lock it. So there's $signs. There's a quick way to do that. You can select it, hit F4 in each one, and it locks it. Dakota actually showed me a cool trick, and I hadn't used this until a few years ago, but you can reference a column. So again, I'm going to do count if, what's my range? I'm now going to select the column, so you can see E to E. My criteria is Y, and now I don't have that problem. Because again, it's looking through the entire column. There's some drawbacks to that. We'll talk about that in a minute, because if you have totals, it could double count those totals. One other layer to this, again, we're trying to create efficiency here. If I do a count if, again, I want to do the column, and instead of typing the Y, if I do a reference, so I know it's referencing the Y, Excel can use that, and then I can copy and paste this. So again, you very quickly are able to kind of pull specific data out, and Dakota's kind of going to get into more detail on VLOOKUP and kind of get pretty heavy into this. But again, referencing and how to reference, there's great things about it, but you also have to know what can it do, because there's some drawbacks as well. Okay. The next one I want to go through is sum value. So there's a sum function that you can use in here. So I'm going back to the disbursement tab. And you can see here, we already have a sum. Now I'm going to quickly just delete this. So again, Excel, you can do this multiple ways. On the top right, you have an auto sum function, which will do that. So you can sum that. You can, if you want to use the formula, you can just search sum, select the data. And Excel does a good job of kind of guessing what you want, but you always want to check that. That'll work as well. And you can see my output, 398,000. I know that's what my total should be. But if you want to get back to the shortcuts, so like the cheat sheet that I mentioned, Alt equals is one that I use quite a bit. It does the same thing. So again, I quickly just hit Alt equals, and now you've got your total. So again, multiple ways to get to the same thing. And with that, I have my second joke for Dakota. So you don't have to answer this one, but it said, I asked my dad if he knew any formulas in Excel. He said, yeah, some. All right, I mentioned filters earlier, and I kind of want to show some of the capabilities in the filters. And I apologize if we're going quickly. We're trying to cover a lot of information, and I know an hour and 15 minutes probably isn't enough time, but we're trying to get a lot of content in here. So again, the filters is one we also use quite a bit. So again, with the filter, I want to make sure that the data I want is filtered correctly. So again, I want to make sure there's a space between this, and then I want to select the data. So, you know, with some people, you would click and drag. To me, that takes forever. You can do the Control A, or alternatively, if you want to do Control Shift over and down, and then you're able to filter this multiple ways. So again, there's a button for that, the filter button, and then the one I use is Control Shift L. The one Dakota uses is
Alt AT.
And we won't get into the alt functions, but there's a whole nother way to kind of navigate within here. Again, not having to use your mouse, but again, we're going to focus on just the cheat sheet at this point. So again, Control Shift L will get you kind of the ability to filter that, and then from there you just filter it however you want. There's a lot of things in here, and we don't have a ton of time to go through all of it, but you can do ascending versus descending. There's a search function that's super powerful in my opinion. So if you know there's a specific word you want to look for, you can just start typing it here. There's filters within here. Again, this works for numbers and dates, all sorts of stuff. So filters are a great tool as well. It's just another means to an end. So again, you've got to kind of have an idea as to what you're trying to get to. Trim function. So I'm actually going to navigate to the disbursement tab trim, or disbursement data trim tab. Again, we're not going to go crazy with this, but Dakota may be able to touch on this later as far as cleaning up data. But sometimes you'll get data out of a system that has extra spaces, and you just want to clean it up quickly. So there's a trim function. So I'll show you what I mean. So again, I'm going to hit Control A, Control Shift L, quickly filter that, and then I'm going to do it in ascending order. You'll see it looks like it's in alphabetical order, but there's actually a space in here. So the Copernicus, you've got some at the top and then some at 106. So with the trim function, again, it kind of tells you when you're typing it, removes all extra spaces. So if I do trim, again, reference the text I want in parentheses, it very quickly removes that extra space in the front. And then the power in Excel, and I didn't mention this earlier, is you've got a copy and paste function if you hit the bottom left corner twice, or bottom right corner twice. So again, I know my formula is good. I want it to go all the way down to the end of my data. Double click, it's quickly pulled that over. Now I'm going to remove my filter, and then I'm going to create a new filter, and then I'm going to resort. So you can see now that it's filtered correctly. So again, I'm not going crazy with this one, but there are all sorts of formulas and functions in here that can help you kind of clean up a data, especially if the messier data, you know, we get from some of our clients or maybe out of the system. So it's just one to kind of keep in mind. Now I'm going to actually go back to my disbursement tab. A couple of other functions. Left, right, and mid. Mid is one that Dakota seems to think there's zero value in.
And there is no value.
But the reason I want to show you this is not only for the function, but also how to insert columns. So there's, you know, again, multiple ways to do this. You can right-click insert is one way. You can, it's interesting, we just realized this going through together. If you have a 10 key, you can hit Control plus on the 10 key, and it'll let you insert. If you don't have a 10 key, then you want to Control Shift equals. Again, just another way to do that. And the other thing I want to mention is there's also a quick toolbar you can set up. So we tend to insert and remove a significant amount of rows and columns. You can add these. So you can see I've got these set up. So if you right click in your kind of the gray text here, you can customize this. Again, I'm not going to show you how to do this, but you can very quickly go to search in your commands and then add and remove these. So again, insert columns, rows. So again, if you would prefer to have an easy button on the top left, you can do it that way as well. So as I mentioned, a couple formulas, the left. So if for whatever reason you wanted to pull out certain data, so for us, when we're looking at maybe a GL number, or we've got some sort of information that we know we want, say, the first 3 characters in that data set. So I can select the text and tell it, hey, I just want to pick up the first 3. And you can see, okay, it's saying, okay, that's what your first 3 look like. I'm good. Again, I can do right, pick the text. I want the right 3, so I get the numbers. And then mid. This one's a little different. It asks you, where do you want to start? I want to start in the second character. And again, this is just as an example. And then again, you can very quickly select the data, hit the bottom right, and boom, the formula pulls all the way down to the end of your table. All right, the next function I want to show is concatenate. And this is one too where I think we use quite a bit with our GLs as far as trying to import and kind of make sure we've got it correctly. Concatenate's one where it takes values and combines them. So this is a pretty basic, table to work with. So concatenate, it says, what's the first text? I select that. I go to the next one. Now you'll notice, if you were just to do that, it's all combined. Concatenate kind of takes it literally. So you've actually got to create a space. And just like when we were talking earlier about the Y's for the text, you've got to create a space with your quotes and basically build in your space. So now, yeah. So it should work. So very quickly, and then you've got an output. It's kind of neat. I mean, for us Excel nerds, if you wanted to do, say, last name, and you did comma space, for whatever reason, it realizes, hey, we know you want a space there, and then first name, and you can see the output example is correct. Again, pull that down very quickly. We're able to do that. Wanted to show you one other thing with concatenate. As I mentioned, the GL numbers will sometimes combine information. So with Excel, when you try and enter multiple zeros, it assumes it just wants 1 0. However, I'm just going to go ahead and create a text, 4 zeros, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then again on concatenate, I can select this, comma, and now you've, essentially, if you're trying to create a new GL structure, you're able to do that. Again, there's a lot of different ways you can do this. And what's interesting is it took that text, pulled it in, and then I can even create a formula off that, and it's still gonna kind of recognize it as a numeric value. So again, just another layer to concatenate. One thing I didn't want to mention, it's tough in here because the screen isn't huge, but within PDF and Excel, one thing we use a lot is new window. I'll try and show it on the presentation. It's hard to probably see on here, but if you click view, new window, I'm essentially able to have multiple of the same instance. So what's nice is if you have a huge data, you can look at multiple tabs and then kind of work through those tabs or review multiple tabs or PDF pages. So again, you just want to be able to recognize that there may be an instance where you want to review information on one tab and compare it to another tab, but you want that same instance. So again, just something to refer back to. I'm going to close this because it probably doesn't look great, but the new window is a great tool to use, especially in Excel and PDF. The last thing I want to cover before I turn it over to Dakota is pivot table. Again, we could have an entire class on pivot table. I'm going to go to the disbursement pivot table tab. So it's the second tab in your workbook. You can find the pivot function if you do insert pivot. That's where you're going to find it. So I'm going to quickly insert pivot. You've got some options here. So it's asking, hey, where in the table or range do you want to look? So for me, I want to pick all the information in here. So again, I'm going to do Control-Shift over, down, and then it asks you, where do you want to put this information? So for simplicity purposes, I want to keep it in this worksheet. So I'm going to go ahead and keep it in existing, and then I put it in the location I want. If you want to create a separate tab, you can do new worksheet and do that, but for our purposes, we'll just do new worksheet. So, oops. So this is an error we get quite a bit. So you may have data where you think, hey, everything looks good, I should be able to create a pivot, but in the error it says, hey, not all your columns are labeled. So one of the kind of ways to look for, or things to try and see what the issue is for hidden rows or columns. A lot of times we have this problem. So here, I'm going to kind of tell you where it is. Column C is hidden. So I'm going to right click, unhide, and you can see this column doesn't have a header. So I'm actually going to delete this column. I don't need this column. And then again, I'm going to create my pivot. So going back here, my range, and then I want to keep it in this worksheet, so existing's fine. So now you've created your pivot, and there's some options in here. It gives you what your column headers are, and then you've got kind of different functionality in here. The first one, well, what's nice with Excel, again, it tries to assume certain things. So I'm going to use name and payment. So name kind of knows, hey, I think you want it in the rows, and then payment. So it summarizes that data by the name, again, by how I want it organized. One of the things, kind of a pro tip here is sometimes it'll assume the wrong type of information. So that payment may come in as a count. To quickly fix that, you go to value field setting and you change it. So again, you may pull it in, it looks like that, and you're like, well, that's not right. Again, you know it's a count, so you can quickly hit the drop down, field setting, sum, and there you go. What's nice with this too is you can kind of do a drag and drop. We can also add a layer in here if I want quarters, so it can go by quarters. I can do it as a filter. So if I wanted a filter, I can change, hey, I want to look at just the first quarter payments, or hey, I want to look at multiple, so first and second quarter. Again, kind of a nice piece in here as well. One of the drawbacks, and Dakota's going to kind of show you the benefit of doing a formula versus a pivot table, is it doesn't do an auto refresh. So, and I'll show you what I mean here. So if I do Control-Shift right down, Control-Shift L, I'm going to organize this. So you can see this C&E. Right now it's at 31. Well, let me select all. I've got about $5,400. If I delete this, you'll see that it hasn't updated, and that's because it doesn't have an auto refresh. I've actually have to manually refresh the pivot. So if you know data is changing, you've got to refresh this. So again, one of the drawbacks to it, pivot's great, gives you a lot of ability to kind of look at different granular levels, but you just got to realize it doesn't auto refresh. One other thing I'll add to this, what's nice with pivot, you can drill down. So if you're able to get data in a pivot table and you're saying, hey, I want to look at what this $2,300 is made up from on a transactional level, you double click on that, it'll create a separate tab which will have that data that makes up that $2,300. So again, just a kind of a high level what pivot tables can do, but did want to make sure we covered that just so you all were at least aware of it.
And just to reiterate, we could do a class on pivot tables alone here, so we know We know we're throwing this at you guys real quick, but it does help you combine sorting, kind of filtering, and then this drill down. So you have part of that filter function in Pivot still, that you have a nice quick reference to it. There are a couple other things that can go wrong in pivots if you do have an additional space in a name or something like that, or if you're working with a data set where maybe the name has been entered in, wrong for BIF's regional utilities, maybe it was pronounced Bill's regional utilities, then that would show up as a separate name because it's only as good as the base data you're going to use for it. So just as a tip, some things can go wrong here, and we could keep elaborating, but we want to move on so we can kind of get you guys into a couple different formulas to use in Excel. And I think we're ready for our second polling question.
Okay. So in just a minute, we're going to see the second polling question pop up. What is your current Excel skill level? And I'll give you guys a few minutes to respond to this. Okay, and while I give everyone a couple seconds to respond to the polling question, we have had a few questions come in. I know we don't have a lot of time, but I'll just start at the top and maybe ask one or two if we have time, Brendan.
Sure.
The first one is, what do countifs do?
So it's that's a whole conversation on.
Should we?
There's if statements in here. So basically it looks like a criteria, and it would count it if it hits that criteria. So we're actually going to cover some ifs later. You'll see how that, Dakota will kind of show that. But the count if would say, hey, essentially if, the criteria is Y, let's go ahead or I guess for count ifs, it's any kind of like numeric or text value. So if the count if is, hey, if your criteria is Y, please count me, essentially that's what it's saying. But ifs are looking for a criteria to pick up, and then it's going to, again, have an output of whatever you're asking it for. So there's sum ifs, there's count ifs, there's all sorts of average ifs, all sorts of if statements, but it kind of looks for a criteria and then it adds that.
Okay, and then one more quick question, because I know we have a lot more presentation to cover. Do you ever use autofill instead of right, left, mid formula?
Autofill.
Okay. And for everyone else who submitted a question, we'll follow up with you later in the presentation or after. So I'm going to go ahead and close the poll, and let's share the results. So what is your current Excel level? 3% dread the thought of Excel and opening spreadsheets. 31% use daily for normal tasks. 61% know some fancy tricks, but still improving. And 6% spreadsheets bow before me and bend in my will.
All right. Well, you will notice that there's been a shift in the screen as it is now green. Oh, you can't see it?
No, I can't see your screen.
Oh, wait.
Did you not accept that?
I am.
It's not pulled up.
Sorry, everyone. We switched presenters because Dakota is going to start presenting. There we go.
All right.
We see it.
Now it's popped up. Okay. Apologies. But so I have a green screen because I cannot deal with the white background. I'm 27 going on 28 and my eyes are already killing me. So I default to that. So if it looks a little different, apologies in advance, but mine's going to be green as we're going through this presentation. And it's kind of nice that someone did ask an if question, because that's one of the first things we're going to be looking at on this side is the sum if formula. So there are two formulas that you can kind of go here. There's sum if and sum ifs. And the most important thing I want you to take away from this presentation is that sum if is a trash formula and should never be used. Sum ifs, however, is fantastic and should be used at every possible opportunity. So basically the difference is one can do multiple criteria and one can do only one criteria. So sum ifs gives you more capable power, and it actually is in general easier to follow. So I'm just going to type it in here real quick and go to the function. So you see it's going to start with your sum range and it's going to get to your criteria range. And then once you put in a criteria range, which we'll do in a second, you have to specify what that is. So real quick, I'm just going to go ahead and select our sum range. I'm just going to select this payment column and do Control Shift down. And then the criteria range, I'm going to do the exact same set of data. So I could just copy this in if I felt like it. I could do Control Shift down again, whatever you find easiest. And now I'm just going to go for payments that are greater than $1,000. So we have to remember we have to put in our little apostrophes or it's not going to pick it up. And you can kind of see how automatically it's gone to criteria range 2. So it's already saying, hey, do you want to add something else to this? And we don't really want to do that. And there you can see right now we're picking up all payments that are greater than $1,000. So that's 370,000. So that's kind of just like the first easy way to do it. You can also, as Brendan touched on earlier, just reference a column. So if I wanted to, I'm going to go ahead and delete this and do the same thing again. So I'm going to type my sum ifs. I want to sum everything in column E. The criteria is still going to be the same column because I want to do it by that numerical value. And this time I'm just going to type in my apostrophes greater than $1,000. And so immediately we can see this is double, right? At least something's wrong. Something's not being picked up correctly, or is it? The formula, it's never normally the formula's fault. So no matter how much Brendan and I blame the formula for a lot of the issues we have, it's normally not what's happening. We have probably screwed something up when we've input something. So here, using those control arrows, I'm just going to do the control arrow down. And here it takes me to the bottom of the data set, but you can see included in column E is the sum. So it's actually picking up the sum in this formula. So that's just going to be something we need to watch out on as you're doing these formulas to say, okay, am I going to be double counting those totals? And that's why a lot of the times when we do our data manipulation, we actually end up taking out the totals to make it easier and to make sure we don't double count anything. So SUMIFs is actually cannot just be used just on numbers. We can also use it specifically with text. So we can do the same kind of formula where I'm going to sum if, I'm going to sum this range, but now what I'm going to change is my criteria range. So let's say that I want to do it by a specific name. So, and then we've got Emmett Brown here. So then I'm going to put in a comma and I'm going to type in first my apostrophes and then Emmett Brown, close it. And there you can see that's my sum of everything that says Emmett Brown in it. So the sad thing is I'm lazier than that. That was way too much that I had to do. I had to type something. I had to remember which shift it is to get to the apostrophe. I'm not a fan. So I'm going to delete this real quick, but I'm going to go here and I'm going to copy Emmett Brown and bring it up here for us. So just copied and paste, Control V, Control C, Control V. Then I'm going to equal the same formula and get sum ifs going, sum this range, same criteria range, but I'm just going to have it equals this cell that has Emmett Brown in it. And it automatically knows what I'm talking about, and it's the exact same number.
And if you're like me, you're terrible at spelling, so it's probably better to do a copy and paste, because I would definitely mess up Emmett.
There have been multiple times when I've just spelled something wrong, and that's why I didn't pick it up, and I've since forgotten that 2 years ago. It's in the past. So that's just an easy way to do it. But one thing Brendan touched on that I want to show right here is this will auto update. So as soon as there are changes in this formula, something's going to change. So with my data set here, you can see here's Emmett Brown, $35. Well, I can easily take out this $35 and it changes automatically and Control Z to bring it back, or I can just take out Emmett and it updates, goes $35 lower. So that's one of the nice things about some ifs. You don't have to hit that refresh function that comes in. You can just instantly have that updated. So we're going to show you a quick way. We already talked about the pivots here, but now I'm going to show you how you can kind of get the same thing with a sum ifs function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Control Shift down on this name in column D. I'm going to copy it, Control C, bring it over to column G. So now what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to navigate to the tabs up here. So I'm going to go to Data, and I'm going to remove these duplicates. So it just tells you what it does. Delete duplicate rows from a sheet. You say, great, what column do you want to use? This name column, I'd like to get rid of them. And then here's just saying it has headers. So it's going to pick it up. Actually, I don't think it does this time. And there we go. We remove 118 duplicate values. So I have 16 values left. So bring it over here. And now I'm going to use that same SOMIFS function we just talked about. Gonna sum this range. My criteria range still the same. And then just equals to the first cell here to the left. And boom, that's my amount for C and E that Brendan kind of ran through earlier. And then I'm going to use the same trick, double clicking the bottom right corner, copy it down, and expand this a little bit so we can see it. And here you can see at the bottom, it's really small, but the average count and sum. So I'm going to add the sum here just to make things easier. So I've got a sum of $398,735. And if you ever wanted to, you can easily check to make sure you're capturing everything, because I've removed all the duplicate values. This should be my total data set. So I'm just going to use the control down arrow again. And you can see there's 398,735 for 398,735. You could add a check calc in here if you really wanted to, and reference them to themselves. And this time I'm just going to scroll down to show you how much longer that takes. And then there's your check figure. And then once again, if some of this data set were to change, your check figure is instantly going to be off because, oh, something's not right. I'm missing something. Maybe something doesn't have a name. Maybe a payment isn't getting picked up correctly. Maybe a number stored as text. That's just a nice, easy way to be able to check yourself on that. So I'm also going to run through just kind of quickly what multiple criteria can do for you here. So we can actually do that same greater than 1,000 number using the same data set. So I can kind of do the SOMIFS, the exact same formula. I still want to grab these payments. I still want this criteria range, and I still want it to be this cell, but I'm going to add a second criteria range. And just to show you what it looks like in the formula or the function bar, here it's thinking it's complete already until I click in that last criteria. Now it's like, oh, what's your next criteria? So I'm going to go ahead and select column E again, and I'm going to go ahead and do greater than $1,000. And I'm going to drag it down and make it a little prettier, because we accountants, we don't like seeing anything like that. I'd rather see the sense. So here you can see it's now grabbed everything that's over $1,000. And it's grabbed that $370,060.67, which was the first SOMIFS formula we did. And now you may be thinking, why didn't it grab the total? We grabbed the total the last time we did that as well. But we've actually specified the first criteria range that the name has to match up with one of these cells. So since our total row at the bottom here doesn't have a name, it's not going to pick it up. It knows to look for it. This is blank. That blank doesn't match anything up here in our SOMIFS table, so it's just moving on without it. And then real quick, I'm going to do this one kind of fast, so I apologize for that. You can also do it based on date, so it doesn't just have to be on a numerical value. So I'm basically going to run the exact same function criteria of that, except my second criteria range is going to be this check number. And for instance, there's only like 4 or 5 checks that are before this date. So I'm just going to type in, once again, remember your apostrophes. So it has to be greater than 1/6/2016. And I'm just gonna double click there to do that again. And it's basically giving me all of the items that are after this check date, because this is the only one before 1/6/16. So basically what I'm trying to say there's multiple ways to play with it. Once again, if there's one thing you remember, SOMIF is trash and SOMIFs is amazing. Never use a SOMIF function. It will only cause you pain and heartache. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of these extra criteria ones for us as we move on to our VLOOKUP function. So this one, it sounds scary. There's a lot more steps. I think this one has 4 or 5 steps in the actual formula or function box, but I promise it's not that bad and we can get through it together. So I'm going to go over here to the vendor tab. And here, I'm just in column F, I'm going to try to run a VLOOKUP. So I'm going to go to the function first so we can kind of walk through this. So that's a lot. Already, it's like an email you get that has multiple paragraphs or like a long line of 10 plus that you really don't want to read. So you file it away and tell yourself you're going to look at it later, but you don't. So it looks bad, but it's actually pretty simple as long as you take it piece by piece. So even the definition's long. That's close to like 2 sentences for Excel. That's a decent amount for Excel. Count is just count things. So here it's saying lookup value, and it's look for a value in the leftmost column of a table. And then it's going to return a value in the same row from a column you specify. By default, the table must be sorted in ascending order. That part doesn't really matter so much. But if we go to equals left, so say I want to look up this particular vendor, and then I'm going to go to a table array, but I'm going to go to the sum ifs we just calculated. So I'm going to go to the disbursements tab and see it instantly pops in disbursement. So then I'm going to go ahead and just select these columns. So my table array is going to be column G and column H. And then you have to specify what column number it's going to look up in that table array. So for instance, in this one, I'm going to grab, and you have to count 1, 2, not G, H. It's actually saying, okay, how many columns do I need to look to? So since we're looking for payment totals here, we have column G and H, alphabet, G is right after H, so we can do the second column. And then in the last range, it's telling you it wants to look up a logical value, which this one sounds kind of backwards, but basically if it's an exact match to what it's looking for, you want to type in false. I'm gonna hit OK here. You can already see that the value has actually populated through, so you know it's going to spit this number out. And so now I have a VLOOKUP that is looking up the total for Copernicus and Brown, which if we come over here, Copernicus and Brown has $12,124.72, and it's picking that up. So a couple of things to clarify here. You can't, the leftmost column of the table array is extremely important. So for instance, I'm just gonna go in here, I'm gonna go back to this. So it instantly takes me to the disbursement tab, which is nice. But let's say I'm gonna grab column, say I was just doing it and I'm just gonna do it to column A. So if you're just gonna do it to column A, then you still have to adjust which column number you're looking for. So this is what can be kind of troublesome depending on how large your data set is. So if it's in column A, that's technically your first column. So then I'd have to count, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So H is actually my 8th column. So I'd have to update that to 8. But you can see it's not pulling in anything here. And it's because when you're specifying what to look up in the table array you're choosing, it means your first column has to be the most left column. So that's the only one it's going to look in. Once I switched it to A, it's trying to look for Copernicus and Brown in my check number column, and it's not going to find it there. So that's why it's going to spit out and tell me I did something wrong, and then this is the part where you curse at the spreadsheet and say it's doing something wrong. We all have those Friday nights. So I'm going to go ahead and put this up real quick, get this formula back. So we're going to do it from the disbursement array. I'm just going to grab these two. We're going to do column 2, hit false. And then same way we can copy and paste this down and it works okay. And we don't have that issue of that Brendan had at the beginning when we're moving back and forth because we've actually done the columns. If you do the table array of it and actually specify the range, you're going to want to use that shortcut F4 to lock in the cells on both pieces. Otherwise, it's going to keep moving and it's going to cause you to have errors in your data set. And then once again, can't stress it enough what a check figure is. If we already knew what our total disbursements were, we can total this up here. And I can say, okay, well, I know over here it was 398,000. Okay, great, it's 398,000. Because maybe you're missing a vendor here, and then that doesn't pull through, and then the VLOOKUP formula is first going to tell you, what are you talking about? There's no data there, and then also your check figure is going to be off as well. And there are ways you can stop having an error. So there's actually another function you can put in front of this that I'm not going to touch on, but if you're looking for specific things and you know you're going to get some errors in it, but you don't really care about them, you can use an if error function. I'm not going to go into detail on that at all because it'll just complicate this slightly. We just want to show you guys what basic VLOOKUPs are, but there are other ways around that as well. All right. Stacey, how are we doing on questions? Anybody with any on sum ifs or VLOOKUP formulas that we've gone through?
We have one question about what is the difference between sum if and sum ifs.
All right, well, sum if is terrible. But basically, to pull it up real quick, so sum if just starts with a sum range and a criteria. So it's literally the same thing. You can do the same thing for the columns here. You could sum this range if this range, didn't go to the second line. If this criteria range is that. Oh, I typed in sum ifs, sorry. Force of habit. So it actually starts with the range. So the cells you want evaluated. So when you think about that logically, when I'm trying to do a sum function, my first thing I think of is, what am I summing? So when you do a sum if, the first thing it asks for is actually, what range, what condition or criteria are you looking for? So your criteria range is actually your first thing, which immediately doesn't make sense to me since it's a sum function. So you would actually have to put this column first. So since we're doing it by name, that would be our criteria name, a range function. And then when we go to criteria, we could still do C and E specifically, and then I could sum our column E. So it's going to get to the same answer here, but it starts with that given criteria range, which is confusing. So because the sum ifs, if we'll remember by just looking at it a minute ago, starts with the sum range, which makes sense to me. It's logical. It says I'm trying to sum something. I know sum is in the function. Everyone's dad knows sum formulas. So sum is in the function right there, and I know, okay, well, the first thing I want to do is sum this range. So if you put that in, your formula is going to get messed up with sum if, and sum if cannot do the multiple criteria that sum ifs can. I hope I explained that thoroughly. But once again, most important lesson, do not use sum if. It's horrible. Sum ifs is great. It's customizable. It makes more sense, and it's logical. I tend to think I'm a very logical person, and maybe that's why I drift towards that.
So should we use sum if?
No. No. Once again, key takeaway, put it as last polling question. We can still do it. We've got one more hanging out there. All right. The other example I want to run with you guys real quick, and I'm sorry, but this is going to be pretty fast, is editing data. So in my career, it took me over a year to figure out that I can edit a client's schedule they give me, and it's not like set in stone. And that changed my life. So, but one of my first key tricks from the start of this was creating a copy tab. So the first thing I'm going to do is I just copy this, I add a new sheet, and I paste it. And now I've got, I can call it edit or whatever, but now I can actually edit this and not feel bad about destroying my original. And with some of the tips we have here, we can actually use some of the stuff that Brendan brought up. So I can shift over, right, to pick these all up. I can control shift over and it'll keep going till I get the end of the data set. I can control shift down and it'll go slowly, or I can hit control end and it'll take you all the way to the bottom of the data, which sometimes it picks up a couple of rows below and Excel thinks it's additionally there. But for simplicity's sake here, I'm just going to grab this all using control shift over and control shift down to get to the bottom. And then what if you didn't want all of this extra stuff? What if I just wanted columns that had names in them? So I already applied a filter using my way, all AT, which is the same thing as control shift L. And now you can just go in here and I can say, okay, let's just select all the data, whatever you want. And I'm going to go ahead and deselect this. So I haven't selected anything. I'm going to grab these blanks. So now I don't have anything with a name. So I don't have any of the individual transactions, but you'll see I still have numbers over here. But you can see they're actually the total lines. So this line is lining up with total current, total 1 to 30, total 31 to 60, and even my total lines at the bottom. Well, I just want the actual data by invoice level. I'm just going to delete these. So I use shift space bar to grab the whole line and use control shift down. You can do that, or you can scroll either way. But then I'm just going to scroll down here and do control minus, which actually deletes these. And then I'm going to unapply this filter. And now I've got all of my data lined up just by invoice in this line. Nice and easy, no issues with it. And we do this a lot. And then you can use a sum ifs if you wanted to run that off this particular name, if you wanted to total by vendor, which we just did on the data tab. It's just something easy that makes life a little easier when you're dealing with an ugly schedule. So always make sure you have that copy tab first. If you've got an original, then you can mess around with the edit. So then if you're like me, when you inevitably screw up your edit tab, you can go back to the original and you at least make sure you can check it. You have the check figure tab and you have that original set of data just in case you mess up. So one other quick thing I wanted to touch on, I'm weird in this instance, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, so maybe a minute or two, but I actually use Alt a decent amount to function through Excel for certain things. So for instance, these underlines right here would drive me insane. So one easy thing I can do is I can use Alt to kind of navigate. So once you hit Alt the first time, if you can see in the top here, all of these letters just popped up. So now by just clicking that certain letter on a keyboard, I can move to it. So if I want to do the home, I put H, and then you can see all of these other options went up. And there's tons of them, right? You have AT, AM, so there's other quick keys. Instead of just using control, you have these other options as you're learning to go through it, which basically Excel gives us a ton of options. And then here you can even see there's a B on borders. So I could go to borders, and then it even opens to even more letters in there. If you wanted to, you could click in and have no borders, and then they're all gone. So once again, you can navigate multiple ways for that. Personally, I use it a lot when I'm formatting text left and right. If I really wanted this to be on the right side of the cell instead of the left, I'd hit Alt again, gives you all the options. You hit H, and then right here you can see my align right is AR, so I'll hit AR, and it's over there. But basically, I use that to move a lot through Excel without having to touch my mouse. So sometimes you can play a game with yourself to see how often do you have to touch your mouse, how long can you go without doing it on a Saturday when you're just really jazzed up about staying inside because there's still a pandemic. Definitely feel free to add that to your list of activities, highly recommended. And then the only other thing I'm going to mention for you guys real quick is there are tons of Excel add-ins that you can actually get, and just by Googling it, there's tons of different add-ins and short tricks that you can come up with. One I actually use a decent amount. It's called ASAP Utilities. And the first question is, yes, you have to pay. I paid $40 5 years ago for it. It's fantastic. It's a one-time fee. I'm not plugging it at all, but I use it a lot for what I do. So this gives me a ton of different options. So all of these are kind of like a macro. So for instance, there's numbers and dates where I can, what Brendan said when he's converting unrecognized numbers to text, that's one of those. If you ever need to fill up something with leading zeros when you're trying to edit an account number or specify some particular data set out. Sometimes we have some spreadsheets that have issues with the minus sign at the end. So of the number instead of at the beginning. Here, there's a really easy macro that just changes that to the front. So it makes it look better and actually recognize that it's a minus sign. And I could keep kind of going about this, but really don't have a ton of time to go into all of that. So I think for right now, we can just kind of
and real quick, just obviously before you add any sort of utilities, do your due diligence. Make sure it's a legit utility and all that. This is one Dakota's used, and he's not getting paid to plug this right now, but.
And it's straight from Excel.
Yeah.
Like this one is an actual Excel add-in that they made for it.
Right. Just make sure you're kind of doing your due diligence on that front.
Yeah, we don't want to get in trouble with IT that everyone's downloading some additional software at home and then somebody gets hit with something. So we're not endorsing that at all. Good job, Chris. Thank you for the lessons earlier. But I think we've got our third polling question and then possibly any questions to wrap us up with.
Yeah, we had a few more questions come in. I'll launch the third and final polling question of the day. So you'll see that on your screen in just a moment. What was the most valuable item from today's presentation? So we'll give everybody a few seconds to respond to that.
I really hope they don't select the fourth one.
I hope they do. I put that in there. It should be a default option in all polling questions.
And just as a quick reminder, if you're not able to answer the polling question, just submit your answer as a Q&A. All right, it looks like we've heard from most everybody. So 73% said Excel tips and tricks, 13% bad dad jokes,
I got one more.
11% hilarious presenters, and 3% complete waste of my money free webinar.
Oh, you have another dad joke? Wait, do we have actual questions that we should answer?
I don't think we're going to have time to answer a lot of these questions. So for those of you who submitted them, we'll follow up with you. But there is one quick one that several people have asked. How do you change the background to green?
Yeah, so, and believe it or not, this was something that I discovered at my old firm a long time ago because I would get painful migraines by looking at a white screen all day. And I'm once again 27, so it's very sad. But actually you can go to Google and you can input green background or easier on eye background. Now the issue is I don't know how to install it on each of your Office because it's specific. If you have an older version of Office, it's actually really easy to do. You can easily find it on there. But besides the green background, there's this kind of putrid yellow that is also supposed to be better for your eyes. But it'll give you, there's 3 sets that are supposed to be better for you that you can find on there when you do it, and it'll give you the exact color schemes you need. But I don't know specifically how to do it unless you have a certain version of Office.
Sure. And internally, you had to have our IT group.
Well, first I didn't because I did it myself. But yes, then internally you should always go to your IT group.
Hopefully they're not listening to this.
But this
Mark.
is very easy for IT to do. I have helped lead the way here, and I think now we have about half of our employees that use the green screen because apparently we all have terrible eyesight. Can't do the white background.
All right, well, we are just about out of time. I just want to remind everybody that we're taking next week off. So our next webinar will be on July 8th at 2 p.m. and that's Revenue Auditing Lessons Learned from TDT. So thanks everyone for joining us today. We hope you have a great day.